Hey, what's going on, everyone? And welcome to episode 39 of the Alec Walt Show. I'm your host, Alec Walt, alongside another very special guest. And today, we're talking about the New York Jets. 2021 is the first year of Zach Wilson and Robert Saleh. And joining me today to talk about all things New York Jets and more is Dan Graca, the New York Jets pregame and postgame broadcaster. Dan, what's going on, man? Welcome to the show. I really appreciate you joining me.
Alec, thanks for having me, I should say. Episode 39. It's a thrill. It's an honor. Let's do it. Let's talk some football. Season's here, finally.
Yeah, finally. Well, for you guys get to see the first glimpse of Zach Wilson as your franchise QB. You've gotten to see a little bit of him this preseason, this offseason. What are your takeaways so far early on Zach Wilson?
Yeah, I think that the word to use, when talking about Zach so far, Alec, is you say that he looks pretty comfortable, for a guy who, remember, coming into the draft, everybody was questioning, boy, how good could he really be? Because he was at BYU and the competition wasn't as stiff as maybe you would see with some of these other prospects coming from, the Power 5 conferences and whatnot. But, he looks the part of an NFL quarterback. Now, everybody knows that the first two preseason games, he was going up against the 2s and the 3s. He hasn't faced a starting defense yet. He hasn't faced a defense that is going to game plan for him specifically. So that's going to come in time here. But you've already seen the arm talent that people gushed over during the whole pre-draft process. I mean, that's evident here. He looks like he's processing the game pretty good. I don't see any sort of, happy feet in the pocket where he's panicking or anything like that. So all systems check out pretty good right now. But as you know, it's only going to get more difficult once the season starts for real.
So one thing the Jets had to focus on this offseason was hiring the right coaches for this young QB. Yes, we'll get into the head coach in just a second, but your head coach brought in a lot of San Francisco 49ers guys to work with this young quarterback. Your offensive coordinator worked with Kyle Shanahan. Yes, you don't have Kyle Shanahan, but do you like the fact that he's working in an offense that has been very successful for quarterbacks in the NFL?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more importantly, I think the offense is tailored to his skill sets, believe it or not. It's one thing to, have a guy with a lot of potential, but if he's in a system and if he's with coaches that aren't really bringing out the best in him, then I think that that's really a useless proposition here. I don't see that here with the Jets. I think that this West Coast Shanahan offense, as you said, it really plays to Zach Wilson's strengths well. And I think that's been pretty evident early on here. And look, there was a little bit of an adjustment process there, of course, because, everybody knows the tragedy that took place, in July with Greg Knapp, who's, was a veteran offensive quarterback guru coach, for many years, worked with a lot of big names, certainly in the NFL over the years, and is so well respected. He was a guy that was essentially Zach's mentor, from the day he got here, like every day on the field in OTAs and in mini camps. I mean, Greg Knapp was right beside him, was in his ear. He was almost like his own private quarterback coach. So, when the tragedy happened last month, I think that it was a shock to everybody, of course, here. And, Zach being a rookie quarterback, finding his way, I think that he maybe experienced some of those hiccups of not having him around. And, in the last week, the Jets have gone out and brought in Matt Cavanaugh, who's another, longtime NFL assistant coach to kind of be, a quarterback assistant, if you will, and maybe help to fill some of those shoes that Greg Knapp had early on here. So, I think that the pieces are in place right now for him offensively. I think he's got a lot of people that he can turn to help him understand the nuances of this offense and really what it means to play quarterback in the NFL.
So what would you say are realistic expectations for Wilson in year one?
Well, I mean, realistic expectations, I think what you want first and foremost is it would be great if he can play all 17 games, right, and finish the season. Because Sam Darnold, his predecessor with the Jets, he never made it through a full season from start to finish. He was always missing time because of something. The one year he had the mono, one year it was a hand, one year was a foot. It just seemed like it was just a little bit of everything, which contributed, to, I guess, the lack of success that this organization had the last few years here. But if he can make it through the entire season, play every game, I think that that's beneficial. There have been some leaks with the offensive line a little bit, and the fact that all 5 guys really haven't been able to practice together yet so far in training camp, which I don't think necessarily does wonders for a rookie quarterback, right? You want to have that cohesion with you when the season starts here for week 1, because it goes without saying that a lot of what Zach Wilson is going to be able to do this year as a rookie, a lot of it is going to go back to the offensive line and how well they play and how big of a foundation they are in front of him, because you want to make sure you keep this guy upright as much as possible.
So do you like some of the picks they've made the last couple of years? Like, what do you think is going to happen with this offensive line? Because you've already dealt with some injuries this year. Yes, I know you drafted Vera-Tucker in the first round, but it seems like it's been an issue the last couple of years. Do you see anything really changing here with the Jets?
Well, on paper, it's better, right? I mean, on paper, you would like to think so. You mentioned Vera-Tucker. The guy was, the guy's a stud. And, people in that building seem to think that he could be the best offensive lineman on the team, period. So, he missed some time with a pectoral injury. He's now back at practice playing. I don't think he's going to play in the third preseason game against the Eagles. They're going to exercise caution there. But, Morgan Moses, who they signed as a free agent when Washington let him go, he's a veteran presence at the right tackle position. You have a guy like George Fant, who can now be that swing tackle, a backup who's, certainly more than capable. And, Mekhi Becton, I know, has had a rough little offseason here. He had plantar fasciitis in the offseason, couldn't participate in OTA. So you think about this. You're a second-year offensive tackle. You're now having to learn a new scheme. And make no mistake about it, this offense that they're implementing here for the offensive line, it's now tailored to be more of a zone blocking type of a scheme, which means – if you're a lineman, instead of playing vertically and just going straight ahead and trying to beat the guy in front of you, there's a little bit more that's asked of you. Maybe now some more horizontal responsibilities where you got to get out and pull. So things that Becton wasn't doing much necessarily last year. We know that, yeah, he's extremely big, but he's quick on his feet. He's extremely athletic, which is why he was such a tantalizing prospect coming out of Louisville here. But if he can put all these little, nicks and injuries that he's had to deal with here early on, if he could put those behind him, I see no reason as to why he's eventually going to round into form and go out there and be the dominant tackle that they expect him to be.
So one of the cool parts about my job at MLB Network Radio is I have the chance to talk to people like you very regularly. Now, on some of the shows I've worked with you lately during breaks, you have been obsessed with a specific wide receiver out of Ole Miss University. Just give me a quick breakdown. What do you think of Elijah Moore and how he fits in this offense?
Another stud, right? I mean, Elijah Moore, they were doing cartwheels when he was still on the board for them in the second round. That was a guy that they were, that when they moved up to take Elijah Vera-Tucker in that first round, I think their original pick was either 22 or 23. If they had stayed pat at 22 or 23, Elijah Moore could have been the pick then. So the fact that, they waited till the second round, didn't have to move up necessarily to get their hands on him, they were thrilled. And I mean, you saw it in droves during the offseason program, just how talented this guy could be. Even though somebody who's, on the smallest side, he's only about like 5'8", 5'9". So you think that guy is more suited to play the slot, but he could play outside too. And he was productive on the outside. He was somebody else also who had a quad injury here during training camp. He's probably not going to play in that third preseason game either, but he'll be good to go for week one. And he's just one of a number of quality receivers that this team has, Alec, because that's one thing over the last few years, wide receivers and on the depth chart there, it hasn't exactly been a who's who. They've really been plucking guys off the street because of depth issues, and the previous quarterback really didn't have his share of guys that he would feel comfortable distributing the football to. They have about 5-6 guys now that you feel pretty good when you see their name on that depth chart. And of course, Elijah Moore, you expect him to break out here in his rookie year and just do, really some special things, I think, in his NFL career if he could stay healthy.
Yeah, the Jets added guys like Jamison Crowder. He's actually been on the team. They signed Corey Davis, Denzel Mims they drafted last year. So an interesting wide receiver set here for Zach Wilson in year one. One other draft pick you guys made this year before we move on to the defensive side of the football is Michael Carter, the pass-catching machine out of North Carolina. Yes, you guys do have some depth already there with Tevin Coleman and Ty Johnson, but what do you think of Carter, and how do you think he could fit into the Jets this year?
I interviewed him last week, as a matter of fact, for the pregame show for the Packer game, and he's a guy that has a lot of confidence, and he's a guy that they're expecting a lot of things from. If you go back and you look at that San Francisco-style offense, it's not predicated so much on just one guy carrying the bulk of the workload in the backfield. You mentioned two other guys, Coleman, Ty Johnson, and Michael Carter is going to be in that mix as well. LaMichael Pirine was also a draft pick in 2020. I think that he's going to be that short yardage, gain the tough yards type of back. They're just going to ride the hot hand. But you could see 3-4 guys, I think, getting their fair share of carries throughout the course of the season here. But Carter, he was very productive in college at North Carolina, sharing that backfield with Javonte Williams. They both had over 1,000 yards. You mentioned what he could bring to the receiving game as well, out of the backfield. He has a chance to be pretty good as well. And think about it, for a team that in their draft recent history that kind of ignored offense as long as they had, first 4 picks in this draft were all offensive side of the ball. So Joe Douglas trying to right a wrong and gain as many talented players as possible over on that side.
One thing I also think you guys focus on that side of the ball because your head coach, I've taken a little bit to get to this part, is specializes on the defensive side of the ball. Before we get into the defense specifically, what are your thoughts on Saleh and what he brings to the New York Jets?
Well, he brings enthusiasm, and all the guys that you talk to, that's one of the words that, is echoed the most, that this is a guy who, is infectious with his personality. He's always talking about having a good day and, always could see the glimmer and the silver lining and things here. And, you know how it is in sports. Whenever you move on from a head coach, more often than not, you're going to go bring in a guy who is almost in terms of personality, like the polar opposite of the guy that you just had. And Adam Gase, he wasn't exactly an outgoing guy, wasn't, great with a quote or anything like that. And kind of was just ho-hum, matter of fact, all down to business type of guy. And Sal is the opposite. We all saw him for years in San Francisco and him getting worked up on the sidelines with that defense and the energy. And look, he's going to have to rein it in a little bit more here, I think, as the head coach. And I think you do see that on the sideline so far. But he's a guy who wants to be a so-called player's coach. But there's also a fine line there, I think. And anyone will tell you that you can't give too much because you don't want players taking advantage of you there. And I think that there is that balance with him here. And I think he's deserving and ready for his first opportunity. And certainly he's embracing it here to be a head coach.
So a couple years ago, of course, I went to St. Bonaventure. I went to college with a lot of Jets fans. When Darnold was picked, the school went nuts. I mean, yes, it's majority Buffalo fans, but Jets fans were going crazy, and they wouldn't leave me alone. Oh, once Tom Brady's gone, Sam Darnold's going to take over the division. We heard it all. Now Darnold's on the Panthers. Mm-hmm. How do the Jets prevent Wilson Saleh from basically repeating itself from a couple years ago?
No, it's a good question, right? And if the same situation does present itself again, then they're going to be starting the process all over, right? But here's what I'll say. And look, I thought the same thing about Sam Darnold. I was as giddy as anybody else. I was as optimistic as anybody else. I thought that, it was finally going to work out when they drafted Sam, and it didn't. And there's a lot of people, I think, at blame for that. But what's different from 2018 when they brought Darnold in is that now all the so-called major figures are on the same page. You have the general manager who's aligned with the head coach, the guy that he brought in. They both have a quarterback now who they brought in. It's not like anybody is inheriting anybody, and there was always some of that in recent history with the Jets, right? It was just, Bowles McCagnon was like a shotgun marriage. It's not like one guy hired the other. They were both hired at the same time. And then you had, Gase come in here when they decided to move on from Todd Bowles. And, well, he had to inherit a general manager that we know he wasn't very fond of. And he had to inherit a quarterback that maybe he liked, maybe he didn't. We don't know here. But now everything is along those same lines. And I think it goes without saying, Zach Wilson's going to have a lot more at his disposal to be successful early on than I think what Sam Darnold had. And I think that's fair, right? Just in terms of personnel, we talked about all the wide receivers. Darnold never had that. Running backs, even the offensive line potentially. All these things are in place that Darnold, I don't think, had when he came into the league here. So now it's up to the quarterback to go out there and pay dividends and to, reward the organization with how much faith they have in him.
So let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. Yes, I know you guys are dealing with some injuries, but Robert Saleh, now the head coach, you expect to take over on that side of the football. Who are some players you think on that side who are going to benefit significantly from the coaching changes?
Well, I mean, one of the things you mentioned the injuries, and I think that's the place you got to start, right? Because obviously Carl Lawson's the big one. He was unblockable in training camp. They signed him. They gave him all that money to be a difference, to be an edge rusher, to wreak havoc, something that this team hasn't really had since John Abraham, going back like 15 years. That's how far back it's been. And him going down with the Achilles, it hurts. Vinny Curry, who was going to be like a situational pass rusher, the veteran from Philadelphia, they signed him. He's now out for the season. He's going through some medical things. So those are two guys who are going to be part of the defensive line who are now no longer part of the mix. And the defensive line was one of the deepest areas of this football team, I thought, going in. Now other guys are going to have to step up a little bit. Quinnen Williams, who really took a giant leap forward last year, he's going to have to continue to take that leap and become a disruptor in the middle of that defensive line. Sheldon Rankins was a guy they signed from the Saints. This is a guy who's got Pro Bowl potential, right? He was a Pro Bowler if he could stay healthy. So I think a lot more maybe is going to be asked from those two guys in the middle to generate a push. And then on the outside, whether it's the John Franklin Myers, the Bryce Huffs, guys like that, they're going to have to really make their mark. And maybe one of the things that Robert Saleh does, which isn't really typical for his defense, is he might have to get creative a little bit with the X's and O's to try to find ways to generate heat on the quarterback. And that would mean blitzing first and foremost, because they don't really blitz that much in San Francisco. Because when the defensive line in that system, that's really the engine that makes it go. And you rely on those guys to generate a rush and to generate a push, and generate all that pressure up front to where you don't have to sacrifice the rest of your defense going to the quarterback. You could drop him in coverage. He might have to get into that a little bit more here, because missing those couple of guys, and specifically Lawson on that defensive line, I think certainly that's going to impact the way that they get heat on the quarterback.
So I'm looking at your depth chart right now, and I completely forgot you guys signed C.J. Mosley a couple years ago from the Baltimore Ravens due to other situations. He didn't play last year.
COVID, yeah.
How could he impact the middle of this defense now that you have him back this year?
Well, you forgot. A lot of people forgot, because he's been a Jet technically for 2 years. He's played 3 quarters. Not 3 quarters of a season, 3 quarters of a game.
Yeah.
That's all he's played. And if you go back and you remember that game, the opener in 19 against the Buffalo Bills, he single-handedly almost won them that game. He had a pick 6. He was all over the field defensively, and he was just reminding you how good of a player this guy could be, from all his years with the Baltimore Ravens. That's why they gave him all that money in free agency. And then he hurt his groin during that game, and we never saw him again. And like you said, he opted out last year. He showed up in really good shape. He looks thinner. He looks trimmer. He looks a little bit more mobile. But now he's almost going to have to be that veteran, that quarterback, especially with the linebackers, because Jared Davis also went down. A guy they signed in free agency from the Lions. He was going to be one of the starting outside linebackers, a guy who was going to be the quarterback of this defense. Now he's out probably till at least October, and Mosley's going to have probably 2 rookies playing on either side of him. Jamie and Sherwood, Hamso Nasruddin are the 2 guys. But, Alec, those 2 guys were safeties in college. They were safeties who they drafted now to transition to be linebackers. So they have the mobility. They could cover a lot of ground. But playing linebacker in the NFL is a little bit different challenge than what you did in a different position on Saturdays at the collegiate level here. So I think a lot's going to be asked from CJ this year. They're going to expect him to go out there and be the player that he used to be, that everybody knows he can be, because I think his responsibility went up even higher with some of these injuries that they've suffered on defense.
Looking at your schedule heading into week 1 of the regular season, you guys face a familiar quarterback. What are your thoughts on facing Sam Darnold week 1 of the regular season?
Yeah, the NFL knows what it's doing, right? The NFL, they like a good plot line every so often. As they said, why not? Just get it right out of the way. Jets, Panthers, week 1. It was coming, that they were going to have to go to Carolina, but to get it right out of the way, I think that's good. I think it's good for the team, believe it or not. It's good for everybody who was there last year. It's good for Zach Wilson, so he'll answer all the questions leading up to that first game, and then you put it behind you. Then it's over with. Then you don't have to worry about Sam Darnold anymore and the comparisons and so on and so forth. But the reality of the matter is, when you talk about the schedule, that's probably one of the few games that they have early on here where you look at on paper and say they might have a decent shot to win, because other than that, the schedule is pretty daunting out of the gates. And even though we don't play games on paper, you got to go play them on the field with a new staff, new system, all these new pieces you're trying to integrate here. The last thing you want to do is get off to a slow start, which this team has done pretty much for the last couple of years.
You talk about that first month, it's versus Patriots, at Broncos, versus Tennessee. So there's a couple other teams there that are going to potentially be pretty competitive this year. So you're not wrong. The Jets have a pretty tough or so schedule here to start the season. Before I let you go, what's a realistic, in your opinion, win total for the Jets in 2021?
Realistic, I would say, maybe if everything breaks right and they don't suffer any more catastrophic injuries, and, Wilson's going to hit the rookie wall at some point, just like all rookie quarterbacks do. He's going to take his lumps. He's going to have his bad games. That's all part of the process. I think that, if things break right, they could be in that 6 to 7 win range, maybe. That extra game certainly helps you. You're playing the 17th game, so there's the extra opportunity there to get a W for you. But probably, look, this isn't a playoff team. They're in a very, very difficult division. Buffalo's a Super Bowl contender. Miami is a legit playoff caliber team. In New England, look, New England's New England. They went out there and spent a ton of money. They upgraded the roster. You still got a great head coach. They're going to be better. So the Jets, they're bringing up the rear probably in this division. And if they win a couple of games along the way that they're not supposed to, I think that that's a sign of progress here. But yeah, I would say probably that 6-7 range is the most realistic outcome for this team.
All right, Dan, how can our listeners here keep in touch with you on social media, listen to some of your Sirius XM shows and some of the other radio shows, podcasts? Let it all know right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me at Dan Graca, Graca on Twitter. And that's usually a good place to where I'll at least be posting where I'm going to be, what show, what platform, what channel. Like you said, we got a lot of good things going on. So yeah, that's probably the best way to keep engaged with what's on the docket for that given day.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join me here on the Alec Walt Show.
Alec, always a pleasure, my friend. We'll do it again soon.
All right, well, that's me for this episode of the Alec Walt Show. I'm Alec Walt alongside Dan Graca. What do you think of Zach Wilson and the New York Jets in 2021? Feel free to comment that below. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Down the Block Sports for more of my exclusive content. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you very soon.